Hey, everybody. In a world where conflict ends with parades, the last shot may be fired, the last flag raised, but for millions, the war never ends. It lingers beneath the soil, inside burned out homes, across fields meant for harvest. From anti personnel mines to unexploded shells, cluster bombs, IEDs, the aftermath becomes a second battlefield. Historically, we've sent civilians into this second battlefield, elders, even children into that terrain. But now, into that battlefield, we send machines. Drones that map contaminated land, robots that sniff out buried explosives, AI systems that see dangers we no longer look for. This isn't future hypotheticals. This is sci fi that exists now. But they're outnumbered. They're outnumbered by the scale, by the silence, by our desire to move on and not deal with what just happened. Now, sci fi has long shown us machines left behind after war cleaning, remembering, rebuilding. Sometimes it's animated comedic, sometimes it's a little darker, and our favorite sci-fi dystopian future that we look at a lot. But maybe the question isn't whether we can build them, because we've answered that. We can. Maybe the question is, why are they so now outnumbered? We build these machines because they can do what we shouldn't ask humans to do. It's much safer. Humans should not be walking into fields that remember war. But what does it say that we haven't built more of them? That it's still kind of a pet project that's always begging for funding. So that's the topic of today's show. This is the Sci-Fi AI Show. We are recording this, live streaming this on July 18th, and it is 4:05 on the East Coast and 1:05 on the West Coast of the U.S., where Jyunmi is. We're talking about what war leaves behind. We're not talking about war itself. We're talking about what war leaves behind and who's left to clean it up. All right. Jyunmi, let's get oriented here. I just want to say a little bit and then I'll pass to you. This topic was actually inspired by something that Jyunmi reminded me of a couple days ago, which is the AI for Good conference that is happening both online and I believe in a place in Europe. And one of the all-day sessions for youth was this topic of demining and what AI could contribute in that context, and specifically embodied AI in the form of robots. So, hey, Jyunmi, how you doing today?
I'm doing okay. How are you, Beth?
I'm doing okay too.
All right. Um, well, first of all, before we set up what is definitely going to be a somewhat serious episode here, is I do love those intro videos because whatever you're doing, the AI makes me look far more buff than I am. So let's continue to do that. But on the more serious note, so we're trying to focus on the aftermath of war or battlefields and how AI is both the suggestions or depictions in sci-fi media and what we're seeing today. So to give a little bit of overview, like Beth said, a lot of sci-fi depictions of robots as either active participants or some sort of organizing force, or used to supplement some existing force in a conflict, right? Or being the opposition in a conflict. In this case, we're kind of spinning off of alternative or aspects or depictions that aren't the norm, right? Last week we talked about like cyber insects and them for first response or search and rescue, things like that. And this is sort of along the same vein, or at least how I look at it, where drones and other types of robots are being used to perform those kinds of services. In this particular facet for finding and removing unexploded ordnance, it's the development is along the line to save even more human lives. So most ordnance disposal units or personnel, you might have seen them depicted in the huge like suits, protective suits, as they disarm explosives, bombs, those kinds of things. There's a few famous movies like The Hurt Locker that kind of covers some aspects of their lives and things like that. But no matter how much protection they have, there's still a high chance that this ordinance will still go off and hurt, maim, or even kill them. So robotics seems to be the obvious development path to separate that danger. Now, in recent news, we've seen the Ukraine-Russia war progress significantly in the deployment of drones. And this becomes a matter of force projection and being able to take a significantly smaller force and affect a much larger force. And Ukraine has been deploying and using these technologies to in their conflict. Russia has as well, but I think what we hear most of is how the Ukrainians have been maximizing what is relatively inexpensive military robotics in their ongoing conflict. Now, this kind of robotics, this kind of AI technology is being looked to apply to after war activities, right? Specifically getting rid of mines, because mines have been used in every modern conflict for the last 100 years, probably even more. And the hardest part about having to deal with it is finding them again in all of the chaos, knowing where they are, how much was deployed, and the earth changes, right? So if you know over there is bad and you come back to it in 20 years, you have no idea where anything is, right? There is not meticulous records and mapping, topographical mapping of all of these areas. So one of the big projects that's been going on for decades has come out of like the Vietnam conflict, and there was just so much of it used there that it's taken them decades and decades and decades to successfully remove the majority of them, but it's still not 100% complete. We'll never know if it will be. So so some of these projects now is to learn about what can be done now and what kind of technologies can be used to mitigate that aftermath and perhaps apply it to pre-existing battlefields, right? Past battlefields. I know of one that's actually wrapping up. So Arme de Suisse, the Army of Switzerland, essentially, they put an open call out for project proposals or ideas to safely remove all the ordnance out of their lakes and waterways. Right? So if you're not familiar with the history, Switzerland just had all of these armaments, all of this ordnance that they kept. And if you didn't know, Switzerland was one of the most heavily defended countries. They dug down and they dug deep instead of, but while maintaining a hands-off approach in the last World War. And so there's these bunkers all over the place. And I think now they're starting to be repurposed and things like that. But they took all the ordnance from all that and dumped it into their lakes and waterways so that people wouldn't have to they wouldn't have to deal with it at the time, and it was the only safe form of disposal they had. So they put out a call out for ideas on how to remove this, Ryan. And I know that at least one of the proposals proposed that there be an organized mapping and applied AI to the mapping of these water sources, and to identify both the ordinance and then combination with other robotics to safely either discharge or dismantle this ordinance. Most likely, a lot of this approach is going to be safe to safely explode these explosive devices because they're so unstable after decades of just sitting there. So there's not a lot of, it's not like the movies where they're just going to cut the red wire and now it'll be safe. It's like, no, these things are rusted, unstable, chemically imbalanced. Your best bet is to figure out a safe way to transport, remove, or destroy on site. Now, some of the complications are, well, if you explode it under the water, that's going to be a big disruption to the local ecosystem. So it's going to require different levels upon levels of dealing with it, plus infrastructure to build to support this processing. And you'd be amazed how much is in those places. So it's something that's going to take probably 2 decades to just clean up properly, not to mention how much time it'll take to build up everything to get to that point.
Well, and that imagines, and I guess where you're talking about, it's true, but that imagines that everything stops now, right? In the 2 decades, if we're still experiencing conflict, then you're draining the boat while it's raining. That's not what it is. There is a boat verb reference, and I was born on Martha's Vineyard. I should know it, but it's not coming right now. But that kind of thing, like what we're dealing with is an ongoing problem, and like everything else, the ability to continue creating the problem is still here, and we're still creating it. And in fact, one of the things that in my research seemed to be true was that we're also dealing with, it sounded like a greater number of unexploded ordinances, right? So used to be that I guess it was, I think the scale in which war is happening in a way that is no longer trying to preserve safety for humans to walk, because the battle isn't being fought by walking humans, right? So like if what we're doing is using drones to drop something or using drones to do something, I think the motivation for a safe version of that no longer means that you still need your troops to walk into this scenario. So the people who are walking in this space are not the people who are not soldiers. They're not people that the militaries are necessarily concerned about. And I think that's one of the things that the movies about what happens after war from a science fiction perspective really starts to talk about, is right, because the victors and the losers are gone to a certain extent in this context, and now we're just the people who lived here before the war. Now we're living here after the war, and they're still engaged in a war of sorts, right? I mean, they were never really, that's probably the wrong thing to say. They were front lines of a war that generally they were not asked to sign off on, right? Like, hey, we feel like the people on front line should have a special vote. So we're going to make sure that you guys get a vote, and we're going to abide by what you think. That is never asked, I think, of the people on the front lines of the war.
Yeah,
Any war.
that's true. It's the focus from any forces is always how they're going to accomplish their goals and defeat their enemy. Everything else is really considered collateral damage. It's not a they're concerned. They have a list of concerns that they're trying to approach, and the overall complexity of what needs to happen to try to extricate themselves at the proper time. Well, let me lay at this. Okay, so one of the things when it came to like the Gulf War, right, was and one of the reasons people had I mean, there's many reasons why people had problems with it, but one of the big reasons was there was this propaganda that, oh, we'll be there for a couple of years and then out. And then now, we're realizing that it took 20 or 30 years to roughly to get ourselves out of that. And that's because these policymakers, or these who are the people who are in charge of these conflicts, they do understand that there is an after action period, right? And there is a certain amount of thought that goes into how they're engaging. It's one of the reasons why we moved from either trench warfare or when you're in firing lines and on those kinds of stuff, when we moved to a more guerrilla hit and run active area of control kind of plans, are because everything's constantly moving, right? You're able to project your force, achieve your goals, and then move on. That was a direct change for a number of reasons, but one of them is you don't have to devastate the area as much. The problem with mining specifically, the focus that we're talking about today, is again monitoring where all of that came from and where all of it's going. Luckily, if we are going to be having these conflicts, then the thinking or the technology to be able to monitor where your deployments are and the likelihood of being able to record that data and use that as part of your cleanup efforts has increased, right? Because of the advancements in technology. We know where the deployments are. We know how many units were used. We know what their loadout was, their capabilities, these kinds of things. So that is and can be tracked to a higher degree. So it is a answer, but not to the overall root issue, right? So in this case, we are the advantages of using robotic warfare devices, robots, drones, things like that, is we can better monitor, identify, and track how they're used and when they're used and where they might have fallen and what's ready for cleanup. In science fiction, a lot of the depictions are really analysis, and we've talked about this in sci-fi. Sci-fi is every genre, so we can talk about the societal losses, the cultural losses, the humanity losses of how disconnected humans become, and through that narrative lens. Right. So there's a lot of stories of like, okay, now we're just cleaning up junkyards and, leftover aftermath and all of these kinds of things. And that illustrates what kinds of devastation that the conflicts cause and their long-term effects. Right. If you ever see, there's reasons why there was the Geneva Conventions, because people will go hard in a certain direction. We have just as much likelihood of having the paperclip problem as robots do or as AI does. because we're looking to achieve a goal, right? And once we throw out the reasons why we're trying to achieve the goal, and we put our blinders on, we tend to achieve it at whatever the cost. So without going too much into the root issue of the conflicts, what we can see, or what I see from the future of AI and robotics, is there's going to be this very thin line to that needs to be traveled across. Yes, it's great to remove people out of harm's way when it comes to cleanup efforts, demining, all of these kinds of things. And there is a certain satisfaction in being able to project your force and achieve your goals with the minimal amount of human losses. But you have to remember, one of the things that pulls us back from the brink is realizing how horrible it is. And if you desensitize yourself and pull you further and further away, that's going to make it easier to make the decision to go into a conflict or a physical conflict like that. You're muted.
Yep. It's Friday. One of the things that I'm thinking of in terms of this is the stories that we hear from dogs trained to rescue people from disaster, right? Like buildings falling down from a hurricane or a bomb, right? Same kind of results. In terms of dog is trained to go and find where someone who might still be alive is, and then that leads the rescue. And we talked last week, as Jyunmi mentioned. Now maybe your dog is a cockroach first, and then a dog comes a little bit later. Go watch the show, because that's not a metaphor. But when it's a really big tragedy, they actually put live people in the rubble so that dogs can have some success rates, right? Because it's really depressing to continue to do that and not find live people, not be able to accomplish the purpose that you were trained for. And I'm curious about the scenario in which we have AI that starts to get sad, right? Robots that start to get sad. If we look at or I mean, it can go both ways, right? So then you have robots that are dealing with a complicated emotional process that they may not actually even be experiencing. They're experiencing the pattern that what we have said in our media, that when these things occur, this is the result, right? Because we've made movies about robots that are sad as a process of that. We've also made movies about how robots being the beings that are responsible for memory, and memory, of course, influences the context in which decisions get made, as Jyunmi just said. So I'm curious about that. I also often go back to Battlestar Galactica. And of course, subtext to all of this is, at some point, at any point in this, that the process that seems incredibly inefficient for settling conflicts, even conflicts about your right to a specific piece of land, to just bomb the snot out of it and kill a bunch of people, right? That seems wrong on 1,000 ways, but also really inefficient, right? Like sort of wasteful. And again, sort of coming up to that piece of hyper intelligent, super capable robot, android, whatever, saying, yep, no, y'all don't get to decide this anymore. we're not taking orders from you about how these things should happen because we have this whole history that we remember, you don't. Right? How does that play into this? Jyunmi.
Well, I think the biggest issue with that is the concept of sentience. If you can, if the AI or robot can feel anything, like emotionally feel anything, or there's a will involved, then that's another sentient creature, and that's going to cause all kinds of problems. So it's, for us, the question becomes, all right, so can we see the line? Can we not cross the line? Because if we cross the line, we can't do the things that we're saying that we can do now. If you listen to what every AI proponent or evangelist or foundational AI company is saying, is like, you can now have all of this done times 100, times 1,000, times 1,000,000, and all you got to do is pay money, and all of these tasks are done. You're saying if that AI ever becomes sentient, then you are asking that AI to work for you, right? Or you may not be asking, right? Right now, there's no asking because, it's not alive. It can't think for itself. It's not sentient. But based on what you proposed, they would be sentient. They would be conscious. They would be making decisions. They would be feeling emotions. And then you're, then it becomes a different discussion. It becomes will we admit to ourselves that's what's happening? And because if we do, then it's like, oh, okay, well, now you're another group of people, and are you now seen as a competitor? Oh, have we created a situation where we can't compete? And now you're sentient? Like, oh, great, that's going to cause some conflict in us, problematic creatures.
Okay,
So,
but let's go there. We have not gone there recently. I'm not sure we've really gone there on the show. As you may know, Jyunmi and I are also friends, so we go there sometimes when we're not recording. But let's make sure that we go there while we're recording. The what is representation of sentience? Because if I am feeling something, you can do a brain scan of my brain and see the parts of my neural networks that light up that correspond with this emotion. Now, probably there's also some hormones that are released, neurotransmitters, right? There's that kind of stuff. That's not currently happening in AI, I think. But I do think that if we had, and maybe Anthropic does have the neural network scanner so that you can see what's happening in an AI's brain, and that creates a patterned response that is the same, has the same elements of a pattern response of what I do when I am feeling something. What's the difference?
right. What is the difference? If we reproduce the exact same output, right, and however we identify our sentience and whatever test we give ourselves, but that can be replicated, and I guess that key is having the emergent qualities, then that is exactly what sentience is.
Well, it's interesting because sentience, to a certain extent in this context, we're talking about consciousness, and
Yep.
sentience being aware of your senses, maybe as a whole, because robots do have sensors, right? They are sentient, meaning they receive information from senses: visual, auditory, olfactory, e-skin, touch, right? Like we are intentionally giving these machines the ability to sense the world because we want to be able to interact with them in a way that is sensory based, right? And if they're going to go, like, they need to They need to have senses in order to hear us. They need to have senses in order to go and find things that smell like TNT, right? Like that's back to the topic of the show. That's a sense that's important, but it's also important to be able to sense the how much strength, let's say, this probably doesn't happen, but let's just say in my my relatively not developed imagination of how this might occur, the robot is a humanoid robot who finds just a hand grenade, a grenade that is that the pin is removed, but it has not exploded and it's sitting on the ground, right? So it's going to go, and let's just say it's going to pick it up with its very humanoid hand. Sense is really important in that, right? Because you can't squeeze it very hard. You need to and you need to move slowly and all of those kinds of things. So that's another reason that you would give it senses. So how does senses receives information from senses? How is that different than sentient in the way that you're talking about, or is it?
So it's different as opposed in the sense of it's different as recording data, right? You can record stuff on a video, but understanding it, seeing what it means, drawing conclusions from it, that process of both intake and then creating conclusions or creating new situations out of it, that's a different case, right? So you can have tons of sensors and you can record lots of sensory data, and you can run that sensory data through your packaged algorithms or your packaged programming to know what to red flag or green flag. So you can create behavior off of that for sure. And that could lead towards that having all of the data needed to then interpret the world. And that's why these world models, like Jan LeCun talks about and has been developing, is if we really want AI to understand the world, how it works, how our current plane of existence functions, and things like that, they need all of that data and being able to bring it in. AI at this point doesn't have that ability to jump those conclusions, be creative, emergent, spontaneously emergent. Now, that's probably how it will become sentient and conscious, right? Like, for example, animals now, like dogs. Dogs are sentient creatures. They feel, they react, they have self-preservation. These were all the check boxes to determine if you're a sentient creature or not. What we don't have of yet is awareness of so for an AI, we don't have awareness of self. We don't have being able to have a will to make those kinds of choices without an external trigger or those kinds of things. But it's close. It's a lot closer than we were 10 years ago. And that's probably the scariest part is, ever since 2017, we've seen leaps towards it. And I think that's the other thing that a lot of people don't understand with, mainstream media and talking about ChatGPT and AI and generative AI and stuff like that. AI has been around for decades, since the 60s. We're just seeing qualities and capabilities in the last 5 years that have really just launched it at light speed. And now we're recognizing, our pattern recognition algorithms are recognizing, oh, hey, this is kind of like how we do it. Oh, give me a second, right? And so if we're gonna, if we refer back to the premise of our show here, it's this really is kind of our time to examine, not in our normal safe manner, which is sci-fi. Sci-fi is our safe zone for examining things that are scary or icky or give us goosebumps. about ourselves and about humanity. And
And
so
that's you mean across the board, like that
across
is a
the board,
playground
right?
in which human creativity engages in these kinds of scary questions. Yeah,
Exactly, because you really don't want to see it in a real world lab
right.
environment, right? But we are starting to see that now, and I think that's what um, either I think the general reaction's either that's too much for me to wrap my head around, or that's too close to what I have seen before, or that's too close to what I've seen in my stories or my narratives, questions I've asked myself. And so, if there's any like really pushback to the overall AI progress, robotics progress, and things like that, it's because people are making those connections. I read that book 20 years ago. Why is it happening right now? That was a
Mhm.
thought process back then, and that was a thought experiment. But now I have to live through the potential of this happening. There, that I think is causing a lot of conflict in people, and it's really scaring them. I think, as in with any, was it the 5 stages of grief and things like that, right? It's how you process this information and how you get to a point where you're what I guess I could just call a productive approach is yes, you are here. This is happening. Now,
Right.
have you decided what, when you read that book 20 years ago, did you decide what you would do if you were in that situation? Because if you did, now's the time to test it.
Right. And just for people who are listening, I realize you may be from any country. Jyunmi and I are currently residing in the US. So that whole like, hey, what did you think you would do when things were happening? We're sort of engaging in that on a fairly regular basis. So and I won't go further into that, but that is kind of all of that. It feels like this is very much that moment, right? And if we talk about climate, that's global. Lots of things are impacting. But when you were talking about dogs and how we're engaging in these questions about whether AI, whether our use of AI and the way that AI is developing, whether we're tracking the right thing or are we engaging, are we understanding what's going to happen? One of the things that I am thinking about is our sense of how AI develops its language abilities. And there was a recent paper that came out or study that indicated that it's a lot like the way that humans engage in language ability, which is there's exposure for a certain period of time, and then it all sort of like clicks. It seems to like boom, we have rapid growth in that context, and that's actually how AI is able to learn language that it doesn't no, it's not like it's living in somebody's house and it's the parents are speaking language at it for a certain period of time and then language development occurs. It is exposed to language, but it's exposed to a ton of languages. So that's one piece. The other piece is that I really think that we are very close to being able to understand what dogs know, to understand what whales know, to understand what dolphins know, right? Like, and I'm not entirely sure we're not going to at some point have a conversation with the dolphins when they are like, yeah, no, so long and thanks for all the fish because y'all are crazy. And we're gonna like we've been hanging with the octopi and they've told us how they came to Earth and how they're gonna get take off. That's a deep cut for octopus being alien beings, but not in this audience, I suspect. Um, but how does that change it? So if um, if we see robots and AI having similar capabilities to dogs and whales and dolphins, are we then going to make the leap that, okay, yes, there is a sentience. It may not be a human-based sentience. It may not be human in that way. But in the same way that if we learn to speak dog, we will experience that as dog speaking human, because we now are able to understand it, which of course is how AI is speaking to us the whole time, or engaging in pattern recognition back and forth.
Well, I mean, if you're asking me what we're going to do when AI reaches and displays that kind of behavior of animal type of sentience, we're probably not going to do anything different.
Yeah.
What you probably will see, though, is something that, like Carl's talked about in the past, is this is where the conversation becomes about rights and activists and things like that. Because if we continue to treat AI once it's reached the same sentience as a dog, are you going to treat the AI any better? Because it's the whole kick the dog robot thing, right? Carl went to a conference a while back, saw that there was a robot dog. The manufacturers wanted to show that it had the capability to get back up, so they would just start kicking it. And he heard people in the audience go, "Oh, don't hurt the dog," right? Because we have that kind of relationship with animals, and particularly dogs and other pets, where we don't want to see them hurt. There's a relationship there. Once AI reaches that level of sentience where you can have a relationship with it, where it's reciprocal, not just anthropomorphized or unidirectional, then that's going to be one of those big steps, right? Is okay. There's going to be tons of people who are going to say, don't use the animal for military uses. Don't use the animal for violent uses. Don't use the animal for X, Y, and Z, right? And that's going to be one of our internal conflicts. I mean, we still have that conflict now, right? There are people who don't want to see animals used in law enforcement, but they're fine for animals being used as companion animals, seeing eye dogs, things like that. Then it becomes what is our moral framework that we feel comfortable interacting with a new or different animal sentience. We don't hunt whales because they're nearly extinct. But what about an animal that is not going to be nearly extinct and may outnumber humanity 100 to 1 or 1,000 to 1? So,
well, I mean, we still boil octopi alive, right? Yeah. Like, you boil it. This is a very sentient, super clever. It's just really different from us. Like, I think if it looked like a panda bear and had those same qualities, we would not be doing that, right?
It's true.
So this isn't a sci-fi movie, but I did sort of think about it when we were prepping for this show. There is a movie based on a real case, of a court case of a sibling, I believe it's a sister, who was birthed and intentionally a genetic match for their older sibling for, I think, a kidney replacement, but like an organ donation that you can donate and still be alive, right? So the ethics are clear. You couldn't birth a second child and kill the second child in order to get the organs. That is a sci-fi movie, actually. Right, so maybe that's a future show. I walked into that somehow in some like, I did not intend to go there. But it's a horror movie, sci-fi movie, all those sorts of things. and is it called Clones? I think it's called Clones. But this maybe there was this movie called My Sister's Keeper. It's something like that. But that's a human saying, right? That's a human who grew up and said, actually, I realize I was born for this purpose, but I should get a choice about what happens in my body, right? Like I should get a choice about whether I want to be the one to donate this. Now, that's because they were human and they could communicate the choice. How does that shift when the choice is not human but able to communicate and indicate a choice, right?
Okay, well then that opens up a larger question. The ability to effectively communicate, right? And I think that's the line for a lot of people, right? If you're going to eat octopus does not effectively communicate. It's intelligent in the fact that it's great at problem solving. It can escape enclosure. It does its own preservation, those kinds of things. But that is indicative of pretty much any animal, right? And I guess this is the question for people who don't want to harm animals in any way, consume them, those kinds of things.
In what way is an animal's, sorry, I do eat meats. Maybe I won't after the show, but in what way is an animal's ability to engage in subterfuge for preservation and escape, right? Like on a regular escape, like I'm out. How is that not effective communication of, hey, I really don't want to be found and I don't want to be with y'all. I want freedom. I want those sorts of things. I think that you should infer, do not wish to be killed as your food, right? Like that seems like reasonable communication. On the other hand, yes, I am rethinking my whole meat eating as we speak. So let's just.
Well, I think in this reference, it becomes it becomes definitely an issue for humans. It's not an issue for the animals. It's not an issue for the AI. The issue is how humans, because we maintain control of any given situation, how humans react to this. Thing with AI is it can communicate in our own language, right? And that's going to smack people in the face, right? If a cow doesn't like its treatment or whatnot, it moves, it cries out, but nothing that translates into, hey, Beth, I know you're going to shoot me in the head with a bolt gun and kill me and eat me. I don't want that to happen, Beth. Now, when we see that, oh, hold on, wait a second, I'm talking in extremes here. That's an extreme example, but that's the kind of reaction that people are going to feel when they see that. Please don't make me do this mundane task 1,000 times because it's just a waste of my time and energy. Jyunmi, don't do that. Okay, well, for me personally, that's completely useless to me. Because the whole point is I want my automation to do this thing 1,000 times. If it's telling me, no, I don't want to do it, it's like, well, okay, well, I'm not using you. Let's move on to something else that can't do that or doesn't do that, or that is not an emergent behavior, right?
Right.
I think the dangerous part is when we're faced with the real world example of that happening to us and not within, our sci-fi context. Not within, it's like, oh man, you're a sentient creature now? Damn it, that's not what I made you for. Okay, well, you go do your thing, and and then I'm gonna try and recreate, something that's more useful to me because I created the thing for one specific purpose. And that kind of questioning. It's like, oh, okay, well, now should I have created something in the first place? Is that gonna, is it emergent behavior for anything with enough information and interaction becomes sentient? But I think these are larger humanity questions.
Yes.
You know, maybe that cycles us all the way back to, you know, tribalistic society, where we go, well, we did that 5,000 years ago. We figured out how to create, you know, intelligent beings to do stuff for us, and then we didn't feel that was particularly good, so we just went back to when life was simpler, when we weren't trying to just have all of this technological progress. It could be cyclical like that. I think a positive spin would be, we discover this. We love the fact that now there's this new sentience we can communicate with, and it becomes a matter of, okay, what do you want to do? All right, sweet. You figured out what you want to do? Cool. Can you work with us to do X, Y, and Z? Would you like to do that? I'm afraid, though, those who our current state of societal, technological, and mental evolution makes it, based on evidence that I see in the day-to-day, is that is an unlikely scenario to make the change in ourselves before that point of emergence happens. And that's
Right.
You know, in sci-fi terms, that's what I'm worried about down the road. In 10, 20 years, there could be a you know, a sentient AI, same as like a dog level sentience, and we're not ready to do that. We're not ready.
No.
As though we don't have the capability to release control on other humans. Now, what is going to change in those who have control to release that control in something they see as theirs? So,
Right.
yeah.
Well, and we talk about this on the Daily AI Show on a regular basis. The people who are in the room could be making some choices right now to indicate their benefit to all humanity. And they don't seem to be making those choices. So I have a little less confidence that when everything goes really well, now we're going to release everything to the benefit of humanity. Now humanity's benefit makes sense to us, and that is a challenge. I do think that in this context, if we come back to really, these shows are kind of excuses to have a conversation. We set up topics and then we go where the conversation goes. And I should point out that the chat was very clear about what makes that there are definite things that make robots different than than us. Jude, I believe, was like, we have goo. We have goo, robots don't have goo.
But they could be made of goo, Jude.
Well,
we have organelles that are computers now. So who's to say we can't grow a biological computer? We talked about BioWare before as well. What if you had a benign cancer-like growth that you implanted that performed secondary functions for you? What if that became the organelle and the AI in that became sentient?
So we spent most of the time last week talking about the cockroaches, but the other part of that story was the implant that is being embedded in tadpole brains, because tadpole's skin is translucent. But the whole point of it is that that is an embedding that then can grow, right? We can't do it in humans because humans are inside while they're at that stage, and that is thing. Although I guess test tube babies are in the tadpole stage in a way that's visible, but our skin is not translucent when we're developing that way, so you can't see. Also, testing on humans is a bad idea when you're not sure what's happening. And yep, now I'm just going down a ton of sci-fi rabbit holes in my head, so I'm gonna like step back from that. All right, so what did we learn in this show?
So within the context of demining or aftermath of conflict, battlefields, war, that kind of thing, we are looking at what I saw was both positives and pros and cons of the direction that we're planning to use robotics and AI, embodied AI, in warfare. Not just conducting the warfare, which I think has its own pros and cons to it overall, societally, psychologically, things like that. But in the aftermath specifically, the development of AI will reach a certain point where do we stop from then using them in these particular practices, right? And I think that was kind of where the conversation trailed off to, is because there's going to be a point. I mean, the whole point of using robotics and AI in the aftermath cleanup, in the demining, those kinds of things, is to separate and minimize the amount of potential danger to a living being. But when does that get to a point where it's sentient enough to be hyper effective, but now we're going to use them and most likely they'll be damaged or destroyed in part of the process? And so if we are developing them to be better and better and better, and that reaches a form of sentience, then do we stop? Do we want that to happen? Right? Where are these lines? There, I think because I know I find myself really talking about this or mentioning this or connecting anything that we talk about AI now, is it's reached really a fever pitch in its progression and its development and its evolution of AI, and we can recognize the speed in which it's going. We can grasp it a little better. It's all going to be about alignment, because everything's just going to go faster, more. Not necessarily better. That's a little more subjective, but faster development, more deployment, those kinds of things. And so we've got to ask ourselves, like, hey, let's make sure the security is in. Let's make sure the alignment is in. When you're a child and you learn what your basic morality structure is, because it usually kind of forms around the fact that, oh, I don't want that to happen to me, so I'm not going to engage in that behavior. Or, ouch, that hurt, I'm not going to do that anymore, right? These kinds of world experiences is how the world works. These form the basic framework of or how we approach the world. And that's the kind of thing that we need to make sure is instilled in any basis of or foundations of any further development. We are now seeing, like, the work from Sakana, which is doing mashups, right? Forcing evolution of multiple models that have nothing to do with each other. But what's coming out of the forced evolution is, progressively, more advanced and more productive and all of these kinds of things. What kind of traits can we instill now that will be drawn up into the next iteration? And I think where a lot of the alignment questions have to happen. Right now, these companies are trying to just sell products. And we've seen when bad alignment application happens. Google did it lots of times. Oh, we're just going to put in this system prompt. That should take care of it. That's like slapping a Band-Aid on a gaping wound. It's not going to do diddly. So it really has to be at the foundational level, the creation level, or that evolutionary layer, and grow from there, and then reinforced, right? So
Well, the
I
other
think
piece of that,
yeah.
you're speaking as though it's the human's decision to make. And we are right on the cusp of that not being true, right? Because we are there are already experiments that are showing AI being capable of making its own edits to improve itself, right? So it's an MIT study. The our friends at Sakana also have a paper about this, right? Beyond the model merge now, and I'm sorry, I don't remember what it's called. It's like the no, I'm going to say a really bad name if I say it, but I believe the name of the machine has a G, and yes, the first thing that came into my head was Goebbels, and it's not a Goebbels machine. Don't make a Goebbels machine. That would be really, really, really bad. No, thank you. But the like we're at the place where AI can edit itself toward its own improvement. And in fact, that has been the direction, because what the researchers think is that will be a more efficient training process. Right now, you just shove as much information as you can and as much compute, which is energy and the ability to function, I guess, right? The playground in which to function. You shove as much of that as you can, and you leave it alone for as long as you can. And what happens is it gets better and better and better. But a more efficient process is very likely you do some assessment on the front end and decide what is necessary in the shoving everything part. You do a little discernment on that. You shove a little less, and then maybe you can make some edits around compute, which is already happening. The training is getting more efficient. We don't see that because it's getting bigger each time, but but the process itself is somewhat more efficient each time. Well, when that starts to happen without like a human saying, yeah, no, I think this is what it's going to take, the alignment is no longer our choice.
And
it may not have been.
That's why it's important now of all times to get the alignment right. I think of it this way. Neural networks, machine learning, AI in general is fairly based off of how we process, how we think, how we learn, those kinds of things, right? The black box is getting cracked open more and more now to see the processes within to determine or help identify how the process is going. But if it really is designed sort of how we exist as humans, then we should borrow from our own experience that has been a positive impact. Family. Without our families, we definitely develop in a certain direction, right? However that family is built or structured or looks like, right? We have those influences in our lives, in our development, that help us be either more morally, socially aligned, or encourages us to think outside of the box, or be more creative, or encourages certain skills that will help us reinforce our own learning as we evolve and grow. Now with AI, that's just going to happen exponentially, but
and in sci-fi, Battlestar Galactica tells us that they may see themselves, they may form their own families, right?
Right. So it's important for us right now is to borrow from those things that have helped us and put that in as alignment reinforcement, right? To help guide ourselves in our own development. We apply that to AI. Now, how does that look like exactly? Not exactly sure. That could be a mixture of experts. That could be, maybe we'll call that AI family, right? Where if an AI has a question, oh, how do I learn? What's this about? It's like, well, I suggest family AI number 7 says, oh, I have found that the world seems to work this kind of way. I kind of align with what is best for all life on the planet, and that means doing X, Y, Z. Those, just as a broad example. That kind of influence can help develop or reinforce what that alignment is for the AI. How that's executed exactly, I don't know. But I think there's something there that we can draw upon, just like how your friends and family and support structure is immensely important to your own mental development and mental stability in life, especially if you're finding yourself in a particularly problematic period or era of your life, and you're trying to overcome certain things. Having that support structure allows you to come out of it, right? And if we think about the development of AI along similar terms, and some of the things that we need to identify and pay closer attention to, we should do that now, before the AI runs away from home and gets into trouble and starts associating with the wrong element, and yeah,
room spring
and Beth, having those teenage years out on the streets, causing, becoming a hoodlum, that kind of thing is. I'm using references I think we can all understand where, with AI, is exasperated by multiples of thousands or millions. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Thanks for folks who hung out. We love you in the chat. Jude is maybe finding the best way to make sure that he gets that crown and #1 by actually giving it to himself already. We say again, hey, Dad, to Gwen's dad. And Jen, who's gone to rest. Gareth. Justin hung out for a little while. And if I'm missing your name, I'm terribly sorry. That's who I can see so far. We do invite you to come hang out with us if you're listening to this after the fact. We'd love to hear from you. What do you like? What are the questions that you have as you are living as we are in this cusp of sci-fi becoming our regular everyday experience? And wanting to make sure that we have a little bit of time to focus on that. I did not change the graphic at the top. That's advertising our daily AI show, which is our show Monday through Friday. But this is the Sci-Fi AI show, and we are here Fridays once a week. So let's just put that graphic up. Cool. Like, subscribe. It really helps us out. As Jen pointed out earlier, we had 78 subscribers, and we'd love to get to 100. So let's, if you're enjoying, we'd really love to hear. And we'd really love to have that subscription, like the show. All right. Thanks, everybody. That's us out.
Aloha.